Have you ever walked into a room full of smiles, laughter, and celebration, only to feel like a storm is brewing just beneath the surface, waiting to tear everything apart? I did at my younger sister's wedding, a day that was supposed to be about love and new beginnings, but instead became the battlefield where every buried hurt, every unspoken grudge, exploded in a way I never saw coming. My name is Emily, and this is the story of how I thought I could mend a broken family bond on the most beautiful day of my sister's life, only to watch it shatter into pieces I'm not sure I can ever put back together. If you've ever carried old wounds into a moment meant for healing, or wondered if some hurts are just too deep to forgive, stick with me. This isn't just about a wedding gone wrong. It's about the price of silence, the weight of regret, and the desperate hope that maybe, just maybe, love can survive even the ugliest truths. I'm 34 now, sitting alone in my tiny apartment in Portland, Oregon, staring at a photo from that day. My sister, Rachel, in her stunning white gown, smiling like the world is hers, while I stand off to the side, my forced grin hiding a heart full of pain. Outside, the rain taps against my window, a fitting soundtrack to the ache I've been carrying since that weekend last summer. I've got a cup of cold coffee in my hand, a stack of unpaid bills on the table, and a mind that won't stop replaying every word, every look, every moment that turned a day of joy into a nightmare. If you've ever felt like your past is a shadow you can't outrun, or if you've ever lost someone you love to a fight you didn't even know how to start, then you'll understand why I need to get this off my chest. Let's go back to where it all unraveled, to a sunny July afternoon in a small coastal town in Oregon, where I thought I could fix everything, only to lose so much more. I grew up in Seaside, Oregon, a quaint little town where the ocean's roar is a constant companion, and the air always smells faintly of salt and pine. My childhood was a mix of sandy beaches, rainy days spent indoors with board games, and the kind of tight-knit community where everyone knew your name. My parents, Linda and Tom, ran a small diner near the boardwalk, a place where locals gathered for greasy burgers and gossip. Rachel, my sister, is 3 years younger than me, and growing up, we were inseparable. Two peas in a pod, as Mom used to say. We'd build sandcastles until the tide washed them away, share secrets under the covers with a flashlight, and dream of futures far beyond the sleepy streets of Seaside. I was the protective big sister, always looking out for her, while she was the dreamer, the one who saw magic in everything, even in our ordinary lives. But as we got older, cracks started to form in our bond, small at first, almost imperceptible, like hairline fractures in glass. I was the practical one, focused on getting good grades, working part-time at the diner, and saving up to move to Portland for college. Rachel, on the other hand, was carefree, artistic, always sketching in her notebook or losing herself in music, uninterested in the real world I was so obsessed with. By the time I was in high school, I started to resent her for what I saw as her irresponsibility, for the way Mom and Dad seemed to let her slide on chores or rules while I was held to a higher standard. I'd snap at her for leaving her art supplies everywhere, for forgetting to help at the diner, and she'd fire back with tears or silence, her big blue eyes full of hurt I didn't know how to handle. I told myself I was just trying to toughen her up, to prepare her for life, but deep down, I think I was jealous of her freedom, of the way she could just be herself, while I felt trapped by expectations. The real breaking point came when I was 19, just before I left for college. Rachel was 16, and she'd started hanging out with a crowd I didn't trust. Older kids who smoked behind the arcade and skipped school. I caught her sneaking out one night, her backpack slung over her shoulder, and I lost it. I yelled at her in the kitchen, calling her reckless, stupid, saying she was throwing her life away. She screamed back, tears streaming down her face, telling me I didn't understand her, that I was just like Mom and Dad, trying to control her. In the heat of the moment, I said something I've regretted every day since. If you keep this up, you're going to end up a nobody, and I won't be around to clean up your mess. Her face crumpled, and she ran to her room, slamming the door. I left for Portland a week later, and we barely spoke for months. That fight became the wedge between us, a wound that never fully healed, even as we pretended to move on. Over the years, our relationship stayed strained, a fragile thread stretched thin by distance and unspoken resentment. I built a life in Portland, working as a graphic designer, scraping by in a competitive field, while Rachel stayed in Seaside, eventually finding her footing as a freelance illustrator. We'd see each other at holidays, exchanging polite smiles and small talk, but there was always an undercurrent of tension, a history we didn't know how to address. I'd hear about her life through Mom, how she'd fallen in love with a kind-hearted guy named Ethan, a local carpenter, how they'd gotten engaged after dating for 2 years. When Rachel called me herself to ask me to be her maid of honor, I was floored. Her voice was hesitant, almost shy, as if she wasn't sure I'd say yes. I did, of course, with a lump in my throat, hoping this could be our chance to finally bridge the gap, to be sisters again in more than just name. The wedding was set for a Saturday in July, at a charming seaside venue just outside Seaside, a weathered barn overlooking the ocean, with wildflowers dotting the cliffs and the sound of waves crashing in the distance. I threw myself into the role of maid of honor, helping with decorations, organizing the bachelorette party, and even designing the invitations with a personal touch, a little sketch of the barn I knew Rachel would love. I wanted everything to be perfect for her, not just because it was her day, but because I saw it as my opportunity to make amends, to show her I cared, that I was sorry for the years of distance. I'd lie awake at night in my Portland apartment, imagining us laughing together at the rehearsal dinner, maybe even having a heart-to-heart under the stars, finally letting go of the past. I told myself that love, sisterly love, could overcome anything, even a decade of hurt. But as the wedding weekend approached, a gnawing unease settled in my chest, a whisper of doubt I couldn't shake. I started remembering little things. Rachel's clipped tone during planning calls when I suggested something she didn't like, the way she'd sometimes look at me with a flicker of something I couldn't read, maybe anger, maybe sadness. I pushed it down, chalking it up to wedding stress, telling myself I was overthinking. I packed my dress, a soft lavender gown that matched the bridesmaids, and drove the hour and a half to Seaside, my heart a mix of excitement and nerves. Pulling into town, I passed the old diner, now under new ownership but still bearing the faded sign my dad had painted, and felt a rush of nostalgia mixed with dread. This was home, but it was also the place where so much had gone wrong. The rehearsal dinner on Friday night was a blur of familiar faces, old neighbors, family friends, cousins I hadn't seen in years. Rachel looked radiant, her auburn hair swept up, her smile wide as she clung to Ethan's arm, a man whose quiet warmth seemed to ground her. I gave a short speech as maid of honor, my voice shaky but sincere, talking about how proud I was of her, how I'd always looked up to her creativity and spirit, even if I hadn't always shown it. People clapped, and Rachel gave me a small, tight smile, but her eyes didn't meet mine for long. I told myself it was just nerves, that tomorrow, on her big day, we'd connect. I spent the night at my parents' house, in my old bedroom, staring at the faded posters on the wall and the shelf of childhood trinkets, feeling like a stranger in a place that should have felt like home. The wedding day dawned bright and clear, the kind of perfect summer morning that Seaside is known for, with the ocean sparkling under a cloudless sky. I arrived at the venue early, helping set up the floral arches and string lights, my hands busy but my mind racing. Rachel was in a small cottage nearby, getting ready with the other bridesmaids, and I kept stealing glances at the door, hoping for a moment alone with her. When I finally saw her, just before the ceremony, she took my breath away, her dress a cascade of lace, her face glowing with a mix of joy and nerves. I hugged her, whispering how beautiful she looked, and for a second, I thought I felt her relax into me, like old times. But then she pulled back quickly, muttering something about needing to check on the photographer, and I was left standing there, a hollow ache in my chest. The ceremony was beautiful, held on a cliffside lawn with the ocean as a backdrop, the minister's words about love and commitment echoing in my ears. I stood beside Rachel, holding her bouquet, my eyes misty as I watched her and Ethan exchange vows. I wanted to believe this day marked a new chapter for us too, that her happiness would spill over and wash away our past. The reception followed in the barn, transformed with twinkling lights and long tables laden with food, fresh seafood, homemade pies, all the flavors of our childhood. I danced with cousins, laughed with old friends, and kept an eye on Rachel, waiting for the right moment to pull her aside, to say what I'd been rehearsing in my head for weeks, that I was sorry, that I loved her, that I wanted to be close again. But as the night wore on, that moment never came. Rachel seemed to avoid me, always busy with guests or Ethan, her laughter ringing out across the barn while I hovered on the edges, feeling more like an outsider than a sister. I started to notice little things, whispers among the bridesmaids, sidelong glances from family members, attention I couldn't place. My stomach churned, the unease from earlier growing into something sharper, more urgent. I tried to brush it off, telling myself I was being paranoid, but deep down, I knew something was wrong. I grabbed a glass of wine, hoping it would steady my nerves, and wandered outside to the cliff's edge, the cool night air a relief against my flushed skin. I stared at the dark waves below, memories of our childhood crashing over me. Rachel and I running along the beach, giggling as we dodged the tide, a time when hurt wasn't even a word in our vocabulary. That's when the unexpected twist hit, a moment that turned the night, and my world, upside down. I heard footsteps behind me and turned to see Rachel, her dress shimmering in the moonlight, her face a mask of something I couldn't read. Anger, maybe, or pain. She didn't smile, didn't ease into small talk. Instead, she crossed her arms and said, in a voice low and trembling, that she needed to get something off her chest, something she'd been holding onto for years. My heart stopped, my mind racing to that fight in the kitchen, to the words I'd thrown at her like daggers. I opened my mouth to apologize, to preempt whatever she was about to say, but she held up a hand, silencing me. Then she dropped the bombshell. She'd overheard me, just a few months ago at a family barbecue, venting to a cousin about how I still thought she was flaky, How I worried she'd mess up her marriage like she'd messed up so much else. I hadn't even remembered saying it, but the words, repeated back to me in her shaking voice, cut like glass. I stood there, frozen, as she unloaded everything. How my judgment had always made her feel small, how she'd invited me to be made of honor not out of closeness, but out of obligation, hoping I'd prove her wrong, show her I'd changed. But hearing those words at the barbecue, she said, confirmed I was still the same critical, cold sister who'd called her a nobody all those years ago. Her voice broke as she told me how much it hurt, how she'd cried herself to sleep that night, how she'd almost uninvited me from the wedding but didn't want to cause a scene. I felt like the ground had dropped out from under me, shame and regret flooding every inch of my body. I tried to explain, to say I didn't mean it, that I was just frustrated or venting without thinking, but my words stumbled over each other, sounding hollow even to my own ears. Rachel just shook her head, tears glistening in her eyes, and said she didn't know if she could trust me anymore, if she even wanted me in her life after this. The emotional conflict that followed was a storm inside me, a whirlwind of guilt, anger, and desperate longing. I wanted to scream that I loved her, that I'd spent years trying to protect her, that my harsh words came from a place of fear, not hate. But I also felt a flicker of resentment. Why hadn't she told me sooner, given me a chance to apologize before her wedding day? Why did she wait until now, in the middle of her celebration, to lay this on me? I felt betrayed, exposed, like my flaws had been dragged into the spotlight on a night that was supposed to be about joy. But mostly, I felt the crushing weight of my own mistakes, the realization that I'd hurt her far more deeply than I'd ever understood. I thought of all the times I'd dismissed her feelings, all the chances I'd missed to reach out, to rebuild what we'd lost. Standing there on that cliff, with the ocean roaring below and the distant music of the reception floating on the breeze, I felt like I was losing her all over again, maybe for good. Rachel turned and walked back to the barn without another word, leaving me alone with the crashing waves and my spiraling thoughts. I didn't follow her. I couldn't. I stayed outside for what felt like hours, replaying every moment of our history, every harsh word, every missed opportunity. I remembered the way she'd looked up to me as a kid, her hand in mine as we crossed the street, trusting me to keep her safe. How had I let that trust turn into this? I thought about Mom and Dad, who'd always hoped we'd stay close, who'd be heartbroken if they knew how far apart we'd drifted. I wondered if I'd been wrong all along, if my need to fix Rachel, to push her into a mold I thought was right, had been more about my own insecurities than her well-being. The night air grew colder, and I wrapped my arms around myself, tears streaming down my face, feeling more alone than I ever had. Eventually, I went back inside, my face a mess, my heart heavier than I could bear. The reception was winding down, guests trickling out, and Rachel was nowhere to be seen, probably off with Ethan, starting their honeymoon, or maybe just avoiding me. I said quick goodbyes to family, avoiding their curious glances, and drove back to my parents' house in silence, the weight of the night pressing down on me. Lying in my childhood bed again, surrounded by ghosts of a happier time, I couldn't sleep. I kept seeing Rachel's face, the pain in her eyes, and hearing her words, each one a reminder of how I'd failed her. I wanted to call her, to text her, to beg for forgiveness, but I didn't know where to start, or if she'd even listen. I felt like I'd lost my sister, not just to distance or time, but to my own inability to see her, to love her as she was, not as I wanted her to be. The days after the wedding were a blur of numbness and regret. I drove back to Portland, back to my solitary life, my small apartment feeling emptier than ever. I threw myself into work, taking on extra projects, staying late at the office, anything to keep my mind off the ache in my chest. But every quiet moment brought it back. The memory of that cliffside confrontation, the sound of Rachel's voice breaking, the realization that I might have ruined our relationship for good. I started journaling, something I hadn't done since college, pouring out my guilt, my anger at myself, my longing to make things right. I wrote letters to Rachel, pages and pages of apologies and memories, but I never sent them, too afraid of her silence, or worse, her rejection. I also started reflecting on my own life, on why I'd been so hard on her, so quick to judge. I thought about my own struggles, how I'd fought to build a career in a cutthroat industry, how I'd sacrificed relationships and personal happiness for a sense of success that often felt hollow. Maybe I'd projected my own fears onto Rachel, worried she'd make the same mistakes, or maybe I'd envied her ability to live on her own terms, something I'd never quite mastered. I remembered our mom's advice, given years ago during a rare heart-to-heart. You two are different, but you're stronger together. Don't let pride or misunderstanding pull you apart. I nodded then, not really listening, but now her words haunted me. Had I let pride, my need to be right, to be the better sister, destroy the one bond that mattered most? Now, months later, I'm still at a crossroads, caught between the past I can't change and a future I don't know how to face. Rachel and I haven't spoken since the wedding. She sent a brief text a week after, saying she needed space, and I've respected that, even though it kills me. I've seen updates on social media, Photos of her and Ethan on their honeymoon, sketches she's posted of their new life together, and each one is a pang, a reminder of what I'm missing. I've got a half-written email in my drafts, another attempt to apologize, to explain, to ask if we can talk, but I haven't hit send. I'm terrified of what she'll say, or worse, of what she won't. I've also got an invitation to a family reunion next month, back in Seaside, and I don't know if I can face her there, or if I should even go. What if showing up makes things worse? What if staying away confirms I don't care? To anyone out there listening, I'm laying my soul bare, searching for a way through this mess I've made.